Hi everyone! For my project, I looked at how the Humane Society for Hamilton County can better retain new volunteers. First, let's revisit the problem space. The Humane Society for Hamilton County struggles to provide a volunteer orientation experience that encourages new volunteers to return. The shelter has no problem recruiting volunteers. The issue is getting the volunteers to come back after going through the 2-hour orientation process. The volunteer program manager and the new volunteers have overlapping pain points, the main one being time. For the program manager, it is trying to keep the orientation process only as long as it needs to be, and for the volunteers, it's continuously giving their time or even just staying interested throughout the orientation process. Another pain point across all three stakeholder groups was the expectations of the orientation process and volunteering at the shelter doesn't meet the reality of what the volunteer work and environment actually entails. And so I proposed the following question. How might we improve the orientation process so that the new volunteers return after completing orientation to become active volunteers at the shelter? For someone who might look like Jared. A typical volunteer. He's a junior in high school and he tries his best to volunteer every other weekend. He first started volunteering to fulfill required volunteer hours in order to graduate. He's a student athlete and an AB honor roll student, which makes volunteering difficult as his time is limited, therefore demonstrating his pain point. Another key stakeholder group are lead volunteers. Meet Kathy. She volunteers daily out of her love for animals and sense of community. She's employed full-time, but her children are all grown up and out of the house, so volunteering occupies her free time. Her and her husband have 2 rescue dogs and a cat of their own. Next, let's look at the orientation experience by looking at this user journey map to take us through the orientation process. First, there are introductions. Everyone goes around the table telling a little bit about themselves. The volunteers start off by feeling optimistic and might be thinking, I can't wait to start volunteering. Next, the volunteer program manager goes over the handbook, and this is where the volunteers disengage as they were already provided a copy prior to the orientation and should have already read through it. However, it is the program manager's main responsibility to ensure that they are aware of HSHC's policies and procedures. Next is the tour, where realization sets in. Volunteers experience feelings of disappointment and maybe can't even hear or see the program manager as she leads the guided tour because of all the dogs barking. Volunteers then purchase their required shirt and name tag, and though they knew beforehand that this is required, after the disappointment from the tour, they are feeling a little annoyed. After purchasing their shirt, the program manager says they're free to go and enjoy their day or begin volunteering. From my observations, this is where everyone just kind of stood around, looked around at each other. They may have felt a little put on the spot and did not come prepared to volunteer and didn't know where to start or who to go to. And so I asked new volunteers and lead volunteers how we might improve this experience by putting them into 2 different ideation sessions. Each session followed the same protocol. First, I explained the purpose, which was to ideate or come up with as many ideas as possible to help us improve the orientation process. I explained that we would do this by answering how might we questions using brainstorming. There were 2 goals. The first goal was to come up with as many ideas as possible. The second was to evaluate those ideas. Before we started each session, I shared with them the brainstorm rules from Bootleg Bootcamp we would all be using to facilitate a productive brainstorm. Because my space wasn't as big as I had originally planned, I had to stray a little from my script or protocol you see here on this slide. But basically, I had 4 prompts in the form of how might we questions. For the process, I would write the question on a small whiteboard. My participants had 3 minutes to write down as many ideas as possible, but only 1 idea per post-it. At the end of the 3 minutes, they each went around and shared 1 idea at a time until all ideas were laid out on the table. After we had all the ideas on the table, we evaluated and grouped the ideas into categories, beginning with grouping similar answers and eliminating the duplicates. The 4 prompts were as follows. Prompt 1. How might we make it easier for new volunteers to complete their VIT or volunteer and training hours? Ensure volunteers leave orientation feeling positive and excited. Better support lead volunteers. And how might we encourage active participation by the volunteers during the handbook portion of the orientation process? Several key themes emerged when answering these how might we questions. The volunteer ideation group felt strongly about incorporating the VIT hours into the orientation process somehow and being able to interact with the animals, while the lead volunteers realized they needed some sort of process put in place for assisting with the VIT hours. It was not as clear as how it would be incorporated into the orientation process. And fourth, the orientation process itself actually needs to be made or designed to be engaging. In order to make it easier for new volunteers to complete their VIT hours, the volunteer program manager needs to assist or facilitate partnering the new volunteers with the leads. This could be done on-site after the orientation wraps or through their scheduling portal. If done on-site, instead of just saying you're welcome to stay and volunteer, it can be phrased such as, who wants to come back with me to the laundry room where we ran into Kathy on our tour to start their VIT training? Or the lead volunteers who are present that morning can come to the lobby and the program manager can say, if you want to start your VIT hours and learn how to go do dishes, go with Sue, who I have here standing next to me. If you want to sort donations, go with Josh. Now, they may still feel like they're put on the spot, but at least they have the introduction to the lead volunteer and have that opportunity. To ensure volunteers leave orientation feeling positive and excited, they need to be able to interact with an animal. This was a big one. Through our discussions, everyone agreed this would be best at the end. Getting to pet a cat or dog leaves everyone with a warm, fuzzy feeling, and it is said that the end of an experience is what somebody remembers or will base their entire experience off of. We also really like the idea of having new volunteers schedule an animal handling class maybe 2 to 3 weeks out in advance as a goal to work towards. Really, this is more like a deadline. You can only participate in a cat or dog handling class after you completed your volunteering training hours. So, if I as a new volunteer signed up for a cat handling class in 2 weeks, I know I need to have my 10 hours of training completed. And hopefully I'll be more eager to do so since I just got done interacting with one of the cats. Assisting with introductions between new volunteers and leads after orientation is already a way to bridge the gap between the two groups. But how do we better support lead volunteers? There needs to be some sort of process or scheduling system for those who do not stay to volunteer after their orientation. This idea came out of the ideation session with the lead volunteers. By better utilizing the scheduling platform, this is doable. If a lead volunteer is signed up to do general support, such as laundry or dishes, on a Saturday from 8 a.m. to noon, the calendar on the portal can show the slot is filled but open for an additional volunteer if they're looking to complete volunteer and training hours. The new volunteer then signs up for the secondary slot. This lets the lead know they will have a trainee, assuming they check the schedule, or at least give the trainee confidence that they know who they need to ask for and that it's all set up versus showing up and hoping someone is available and willing to train them that day. Finally, we answered, how might we encourage active participation by the new volunteers during the handbook portion of the orientation process? The most popular idea was some sort of handbook quiz. At the end of the handbook portion, there would be anywhere between 5 to 10 questions on the most important rules or policies. Each participant would write down their answer either on a note card or paper numbered 1 through 10 or 1 through 5, and whoever gets the highest grade or answers the most questions correctly does not have to pay for their t-shirt and name tag. Now, we don't want everyone to get their items paid for, as this is a way of fundraising money, so there could be a tougher question to serve as a tiebreaker in which the finalists would wager points, much like at the end of Jeopardy! Let's take another look at part of the journey map I showed you earlier. Recommendations or area of opportunities were to have less volunteers go through each session so the intros don't take so long, have people take turns reading the handbook instead of being read to, and so forth. While these recommendations were created solely to complete the map, I thought these were good ideas and they can still be incorporated, but even better ideas came through in the ideation sessions, and I can truly see how any organization could benefit from utilizing this type of brainstorming.